Hello there, and welcome to the Soul Directive Part 2, beginning with this lovely shot of this oak tree. So the point we'd reached was the idea of a soul having a series of human lives, and their mission was to share information about the nature of love, and how they found themselves in their pivot point lifetime, which was on the battlegrounds of World War One. World War One, I've been doing quite a bit of research about it lately, and having had a bit of time away from it and just to allow things to digest, what I've become aware of is that these wars are so much like when two people get really pissed off with each other and have an argument, and sometimes they start shouting at each other, and sometimes they throw things, and sometimes even end up fighting. That's what a war and a world war actually is. The only thing that's different is the scale, and it's a well-known thing, very uncomfortable to look at, but when a world war or a huge war does occur, the people who are caught up in the fighting often use this as an opportunity to settle old scores, which means they commit atrocities of an unspeakable nature. And I've often wondered why people, why do they do these things? And it's because they've got stuff that's held in, and from the Soul Directive's perspective, this might not just be one lifetime. As someone has a universal soul retrieval for at the end of last year, and what became very clear is they'd had a whole series of lifetimes where they had been very oppressed and suppressed, and they'd taken on huge amounts of responsibility for other people's stuff. So this gives us the idea that in other lives there can be things that there can be a whole load of unresolved stuff, unresolved karma, unresolved issues, things that got suppressed and never got expressed. And so that explains why some people who fight wars, and also some people not even fighting wars, who are just in a war, suddenly they go completely, there's a term for it, we call it berserk. When a person goes berserk, it means they go insane, they lose their mind, they become a mindless berserker, and they do terrible things. So going into it even more, I realised the thing about these wars, it's like an initiation for an entire nation state, or an entire continent, or an entire planet when these wars occur. That's actually what's happening. Because an initiation, remember, we define it by being completely outside your comfort zones in a situation you would never have imagined you're in. And the thing that occurred to me about World War One is you had bakers and postmen and shopkeepers and dress shop owners and all these people leading these very straightforward, mundane lives, maybe a waiter in a cafe, whatever the job, and they suddenly found themselves manipulated into taking part in a hideous genocide where millions were dying. And most of them had very little training, and the little training they had was no preparation for what the actual reality was like. And I guess this is the thing that really sticks in my mind about World War One, because it was very much, we entered a whole new territory in the 20th century, because wars before that used to be fought according to certain rules, and the combatants used to wear very brightly coloured uniforms. The English always used to wear red, because then the colour of the blood wouldn't show on the uniform. Ha ha ha. Yeah, but then suddenly World War II comes along, and you have the tin helmet, and everyone is wearing very drab colours to camouflage themselves so as not to be seen. This hadn't happened before. This was a kind of a really big breakthrough of a different way of being. And I use the word breakthrough not in a positive or a negative sense, but simply something completely different. And then the other thing is, it was a war in which the capability for defence outweighed the capability for offence, and this was a huge significant factor. And it was most particularly the invention of the machine gun and the use of artillery cannons to create bombardments, which used to go on for days, or even a lot longer than days. So the point I'm making is you've got these people who are maybe serving behind the counter, and the next thing they know, they are up to their knees or up to their necks in mud and filth and human waste and body parts, and it just goes on, and there's all this shelling, bombs exploding all around them, people being exploded by bombs. It's very hard for people who've never been through anything very severe to even begin to imagine what this is like. And one of the things I realise is that actually no war film I've ever seen has actually given me a real understanding, but reading the books of Sebastian Faulks has succeeded where all war films have failed. They don't really give you much of an idea what it's like, no matter what they show you, no matter how much they may be appearing to choose to show you the worst bits. They don't really give you much of an idea at all. So the other thing which is really hard for me to get my head around, but they would spend goodness knows how long doing these things, killing and all the rest of it, and then at a certain point they would all be relieved, as they say, and they would all go away, and they would go maybe just 5-10 kilometers away from the front, as they call it, and they would go into a French village, and they would have baths. I'm not talking about anything like what you and I would think of a bath, more like loads and loads of wild animals being put into a situation where they got cleansed and deloused and all the rest of it. Pretty disturbing, the whole thing. And then they would have food, better quality food finally, and then they might be allowed to go somewhere and drink some alcohol. Of course, remember, in all these world wars they were always given tobacco, because that was the thing that was stopping them from going insane from all the negative energies that were flying around the battlefields. And then they would have these days like this, and then they'd have to go back. And of course some of them didn't. There was a particular battle which was described, and what they did to all these soldiers that were ready to go on this battle, they read out all the names of the people that had been executed for trying to run away. And that really hit me. So yeah, these people, here are the names, they tried to run away, and we executed them all. So don't think about it, lads, you just hold to your course. That was pretty disturbing. There's a whole load of other things in that way which were disturbing, but it made me realise that. And then of course the numbers, and they had this thing. I remember being in France in the 1970s, I think it was, and even in those days, in the metro and on the buses, used to have this. They used to say, "These seats are reserved for the war wounded." Actually, the proper translation would be the mutilated people from the war. That's actually what they meant. And it's like there was just so many of them. So right, so I've given you that picture. So what I'm saying is you've got entire nations and beyond who get this incredible initiation where they're taken out of their comfort zones, and they lose all sense of moral compass, what's right, what's wrong, what is up, what is down. Everything is just a filthy sea of mud and body parts and all the rest of it. And a lot of them don't survive, and some of them survive horribly disfigured and damaged, and some of them actually manage to go through the whole thing and somehow stay in one piece, and yet they have all the psychological effects you'd expect from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative identity disorder, all the rest of it. So what we had, and it is happening now, still going on, hasn't stopped, let's remember that fact. The 20th century seemed to be a century, maybe it's just because it's a relatively recent one, it's been well studied, but we have an idea of what went on in such times. So here's the point I'm making. In the lifetime described in that example of the Soul Directive, it was World War I that was the thing that caused a person to make some fundamental changes in their attitude to life, and the result is that the lifetime they came after that, they were able to succeed in the mission. They found a way to give the message of love to those people that they met without being arrogant, without being superior, without turning them off, but actually in the completely opposite way, whereby people are interested in what they have to say because they're saying it in such a really helpful, understanding and compassionate way. And actually the message was delivered and the message was getting through and people were benefiting. And so that was the example in that story I was telling you about a person's series of lives. And the way that little branch is being tossed by the very slightest breath of wind is spellbinding. And is my cue to take us to the next level in all this. So what I learned from the Soul Directive is as follows. There are things that happen to us about which we have absolutely no control except how we choose to respond. When a person finds themselves in a war, they're in a war. But what they choose to do, how they choose to comport themselves, how they choose to act, how they choose to respond, that is critical. And that's what came across in the story from Sebastian Faulks, how this guy who he just was not going to go into the worst of the depravities. He was going to do his absolute best to keep his moral compass, and he affected people all around him, and he caused huge changes in those who knew him, because it caused them to stay their hand where they might have raped, where they might have done this, where they might have done that. They remember that guy and how no matter what was going on and what was done, he always kept his cool and did his very best to minimize any harm or damage that he might be creating through being simply alive. And so this goes further into our own lives. And a thing that I've been very, very keenly aware of myself is that there are some occasions where someone will simply say a sentence, and that sentence will change my life, the life of the person I'm with, and the life of literally thousands of people for an unspecified period of time in the future. That's actually happened to me. Someone said one sentence, that was it. And that's because my ears and the ears of my friend, our ears were open. We listened, we considered what he said, we took it in, we made changes in our lives. And this is something that people who study the subject of karma, reincarnation and the human life are very keenly aware of. You might never have any opportunity to do anything particularly exciting or dramatic to make the world a better place in your opinion, and yet simply one day you might casually just drop a few words and there might be one person listening to what you say. You might not even think it's so important yourself, but that person takes what is said and turns it into a message. And there's very much a case of this. In the 20th century, there's a Shinto philosopher who wrote this book, and the considered opinion is when he wrote the book, he didn't understand what he wrote. He didn't understand its significance, but years later, people did understand its significance, and now we have Shinto practitioners and priests working with ayahuasca in Japan. So this is another example. So it could be the smallest comment, or it could be a big book that you put months or years worth of effort into. We never have any real inkling of just what kind of an effect we have on other people. And this is one of the most beautiful and miraculous things about life. First of all, it encourages us to be mindful of what we say and what we do. And also, it gives us the understanding that we, each of us, have a great power to change the world simply by being who we are, having our experiences, and sharing with other people in whatever way, no matter how casual and informal, no matter how organized and structured. And this is what makes our human lives so utterly fascinating. And when we realize that we have lived before and we may choose to come and incarnate into a human or some other form of existence with a physical body again, well, all the more so do we have such powers and capabilities, and we literally are, each and every one of us, part of the change which we wish to see in the world. And whenever we get the opportunity to choose between the shady, the morally dubious, the corrupt choice, or the enlightened, compassionate, responsible, considerate choice, whenever one of us does this, what a difference that makes in the world. And if someone happens to see us making that choice, who knows how many people might be affected. Maybe only one person sees you behaving in this way which they recognise to be powerful and significant and all part of the changes we want to see in the world, and they might then create a YouTube channel and tell thousands of people about it. So this is my plea to you, to be aware of just how extraordinary we all are, how very gifted and how very full of opportunity each moment is in our lives. And for those people who find themselves in situations where they are in a place which is not beautiful, in circumstances which are not uplifting, with people that are struggling, it could be that your contributions and your gifts are amongst the most important ever to take place in the history of the human race. That's the thing. It could be you, it could be me, it could be your brother, your sister, it could be a member of your family, it could be someone you like, who knows. All the love to you.